Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of True Scary Stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we are going to be reading true scary backwoods stories. I hope you enjoy them. Also, I'm very sorry if my voice sounds a little bit messed up right now. I'm still recovering a little bit from, so I do apologize for that. But anyways, before we get into the stories, I do want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Treats. Treats is a subscription service where they send you treat boxes just like this one from all over the world. I am going to unbox this particular box that we got today here on video. I have not opened this one yet. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the tape here. All right, so let's go ahead and open this up. Try to do it without spilling it. So what I love about Treats is they always start you off the way that it opens with the little flag of wherever your treat box comes from. I'm not good at flags of the world, so I'm not sure where this one is from, but we're gonna go ahead and open this up. Take the top paper off. Oh, this one is exciting. So this one is actually from Mexico. You get a little bit of a paper telling you about all the treats in your box. So in this one, we've got mini chocoretas. And I'm not going to try to pronounce all of them, but we got some Takis in there. We got a lot of stuff in there. You also get a little postcard of some interesting information about where your treats are from, and another little postcard detailing some stuff. So I actually am pretty well versed in Mexican treats because my wife is part Mexican, so therefore my kids are also part Mexican, and we love Mexican treats in this household. So I'm going to go for one that I'm unfamiliar with here. I love me some chocolate, so we're going to go for these chocoretas. I'm going to open this up and taste it here. So they look like little peas. That is really good. So it's got like a little hint of mint in there and some things. I just love these treat boxes because I love trying snacks from all over the world. And I know that you will love these snacks as well. So make sure that you go down into the description down below, click the link down there, and get yourself a box, because I always love opening up my treat box every month and seeing where they come from. But anyways, for now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary backwoods stories. It was September in central Idaho. Autumn had come to the mountains, and with it, bow hunters looking for mountain goats. My cousin, let's call him Vern for anonymity's sake, is an avid hunter. He's been all over North America hunting various game: bears in Alaska, wild hogs in Texas, bighorn sheep in Wyoming. But his favorite hunting area was the Lemhi mountain range in central Idaho. Our extended family has been hunting in those mountains for generations. We know every river bottom and mountain peak like many people know their own neighborhoods. Mountain goats are a fascinating animal to hunt. They live well above the tree line in rocky environments. They are sure-footed and can climb near vertical slopes. Hunting these animals requires one to venture into these dangerous areas. You have to be mindful as you pursue an animal like that. One wrong step on a rocky slope or one loose rock could mean that you're not going home ever again. Vern was an expert mountain hunter. It's something he was born to do. Vern decided to hunt in the Hayden River area of the Lemhis. It's a familiar spot to most locals, and the area is home to plenty of mountain goats. The first mile of Vern's hike was uneventful as he climbed up the canyon. The air was crisp, and his breath formed in great plumes as he progressed. The sun was just peeking over the mountains when Vern came to a small deer trail. He decided it might be a nice shortcut from his usual route and took it. A few hundred feet up the trail, he saw something odd pop out from behind a tree. It was a man. He was dressed in a light denim coat and jeans and was carrying a small backpack. My cousin stopped for a second to get his bearings, unsure of where this guy came from. The man waved at him with both arms. One of them was holding an older-style hunting bow. Acknowledging him, Vern waved back. Although the man looked to be physically fine, it was clear that he was emotionally distressed. He yelled out something that my cousin couldn't quite hear and waved his arm, indicating my cousin should follow him. Vern didn't get any bad vibes from this man and could tell that he was genuinely in need of some help. He began to make his way up the canyon, following this mystery man. Vern could never gain any ground on this guy. He was always just far enough away that he couldn't talk to him. Periodically, the man would stop, turn towards him to make sure that Vern was still following. Every time he looked back, Vern could see the worry in his face. My cousin did his best to remain calm and kept a smile on his face, unsure who or what he was being led to. It was peculiar, Vern thought as he hiked. He hadn't seen any other vehicles on his drive up to the trailhead. Perhaps he came in from over another ridge. What could he possibly be leading him to? He figured one of his hunting party had been hurt and needed help. Of course, he wouldn't have had to speculate if the man would just stop and talk to him for 5 minutes. Vern lost sight of the guy just past a turn in the trail. The trail opened up into an incredibly steep, rocky talus slope. He looked in every direction and could not locate the man when he heard a whistle. Looking up, he saw the guy about 500 feet up the rocky slope waving at him. There was no possible way that he could have gotten up that far in just a short time that Vern lost sight of him. He still didn't feel any fear or wariness about this weird situation. The man was waving more frantically now, practically begging Vern to follow him up the slope. With a sigh and a grunt, he started up the rocks. It was slow going. Every other step caused a mini rock slide and would cause him to continually lose his footing. Huffing and puffing on the cool, thin air, my cousin eventually made it to a small landing. It had taken him almost 45 minutes to get to that spot, where he saw the man from below. There was no earthly way anyone could have done that scramble uphill any faster. Totally exhausted and out of breath, Vern sat down on the stone landing. He looked around and couldn't see the man anywhere. As he scanned his surroundings, he saw something odd poking out of a boulder about 20 feet away from him. Walking over to it, he found a weathered boot. 2 boots, actually. Inside those boots, and under the boulder as well, were bones. Vern looked around once again for the man, but he never saw him again. Instead of feeling eerie or unnerving, Vern felt a sense of relief wash over him. These emotions weren't his own. What he felt seemed to come from all around him. He marked the spot with his GPS and decided to make his way down and call the authorities. The Lemhi County Sheriff's Office responded, and he led them up the canyon to the body. It took 4 grown men to push the boulder out of the way, and when they did, they found the skeletonized remains of a man. On the body, they found hunting equipment and some personal effects. From a credit card in the wallet, they were able to identify the man. He was a bow hunter that had gone missing almost exactly 53 years beforehand. Vern never wanted to be identified to the public or the missing hunter's family. He didn't want recognition for something like that. To him, it was just one of those bizarre mountain stories. He was happy that the family got closure, even if it was a half a century later. The only thing that bothered him was the man leading him up the canyon, and with his strange and sudden disappearance. He had mentioned the waving man to the sheriff but was brushed off. When news reports came out announcing the discovery, several photos of the man were published. Vern was absolutely shocked when he saw them. In the photos was the man that he had seen leading him up the mountain to the body. It finally made sense to him. The man's distressful look, the constant checking if Vern was following him, the sense of relief he felt when the body was discovered. That man was desperate to get home. And through Vern, he was able to be reunited with his family. The poster of this story also linked to a news article, and this news article is a news article about the man that was found. I'm going to read that news article now. Idaho Falls. For most of his life, September has been a hard month for Jeffrey Jones. He was born on September 7th, his dad's 27th birthday, and for 12 years they celebrated their special day together. But in 1968, on their birthday, Jeffrey's dad, Raymond Jones, went hunting in the East Fork of Hayden Creek in Lemhi County and never returned. Every September, the memories come rushing back, Jeffrey tells EastIdahoNews.com. Several years ago, I got a tattoo on my arm that's a portrait of my dad. It has September 7th on it, and the phrase, "Wake me up when September ends," from the Green Day song. 2 weeks ago, Jeffrey turned 65 on the day his dad would have turned 92. 3 days later, a bow hunter found a wallet, boot, and some skeletal remains in the area where Raymond disappeared. Lemhi County Sheriff deputies were called and determined the 53-year mystery of the lost hunter had been solved. The bow hunter was going from one hunting area to another and took a shortcut and just happened to come across my dad, Jeffrey explains. It's quite amazing because they had a lot of people up there searching for him, along with helicopters and scent dogs, but they never did find him. Jeffrey remembers his outgoing, well-liked dad always had a smile on his face. Raymond and his wife, Elizabeth Betty Jones, married in the mid-1950s and loved dancing, fishing, and doing everything together. They spent time racing stock cars, but one day, Betty was in a terrible wreck that paralyzed her from the waist down. That had a lot to do with them splitting up, and they ended up divorcing, Jeffrey says. My sisters and I stayed with my mom in Montana, while my dad moved to Salmon and remarried. He would come get me in his plane and take me back to Salmon for 2 to 3 weeks every summer, and then bring me back home. Even though it's been over 5 decades, Jeffrey will never forget learning his father was missing. He was with his mom in Montana celebrating his 12th birthday when they received a phone call from 2 of his uncles saying Raymond had disappeared while hunting. 2 days later, a birthday card for Jeffrey arrived in the mail from his dad that must have been sent before the hunting trip. I believed for a long time that he would be found. I kept hoping, and it was probably 15 years before I finally gave up, Jeffrey says. Rumors and stories kept circulating that somebody had seen him or that he took off. I heard all this stuff and just kept expecting or hoping that he would walk through the door one day. Betty passed away in 1986. Raymond's second wife is still living in Montana, but his parents and siblings have died, except for his 89-year-old sister. Jeffrey says he never expected the call he received last week from a deputy saying his father's remains had been found. Since then, he's spoken with the bow hunter who discovered his dad. I'm very relieved to know what happened. I'm grateful to the guy that found him, Jeffrey says. I couldn't ask for a better person to find my dad. After talking to him, he's just a super guy. The hunter, whose name has not been released, told Jeffrey there were cliffs with layers of slab rock above Raymond's remains. Before he left camp, Raymond told other hunters that he was going to look for mountain goats. The bow hunter believes Raymond may have seen some at the top of the cliffs and tried to climb them. He could have been tempted to climb it, and the hunter thinks rock came off that cliff and landed on him, Jeffrey says. There was a stone covering most of his lower body, and it matched the rock above him. If the fall didn't kill him, that rock for sure did. That was the opinion of the hunter. Jeffrey plans to travel from his home in Billings to Salmon this weekend to collect his father's remains. He will take them to Miles City, Montana, and have them buried next to Raymond's parents. The past week and a half have been surreal, but I'm very lucky to know what happened to my dad after all these years, Jeffrey says. I could have gone my whole life without knowing, but now I know, and it brings some peace. For context, I'm a 17-year-old female, and I've lived in my house my whole life with my 2 other siblings and parents. My family and I have lived in this partly rural part of the Fenton/Heartland, Michigan area for a long time. We own 10 acres of land, which includes a pretty large track in our backyard to ride 4-wheelers and such. Every once in a great while, it seems, we hear strange and unnerving noises when we go outside. A few years ago, my family took a walk to look at our new neighbor's house, as they were gone for the weekend and said we were welcome to check things out. On our way down our quarter-mile gravel driveway, all of us heard what I can only describe as drums and chanting. It really freaked my brother and I out, because it seemed to be a fair distance away, almost as if it had been coming from the woods in our backyard. There was a fair number of drumming sounds, and then we heard chanting. It must have been pretty far away, but the sound still carried, which made it even creepier. I've probably had this occur 2 to 3 times the whole time that we've lived there, and every time it has been unsettling and felt really wrong. We would be very aware if our town had any native tribes or reservations around here, but my small, conservative hometown would not be the place to do so. I've searched high and low, but haven't been able to find anything on the internet in close areas with a similar experience. If anyone here has any information, please feel free to share. Howdy, folks. I posted a while back about a peculiar occurrence at the in-laws' house on Lake Greenwood in South Carolina. My wife and I recently paid a visit there, and for the first time in years had a similar experience to the first time. We had been out all day hiking in the mountains and just enjoying being in the fresh air and out of the concrete jungle of Florida that we live in. It was late, closing in on 1 a.m. We were on the country road just prior to the right turn onto their driveway. Most of the trip down the road was uneventful. Bugs were loud and could be heard even with the windows up. The night sky was clear and littered with stars. The outside was rather well illuminated by moonlight as well. About 100 yards prior to the property, outside the car, we hear the bugs stop as fog rolls in. The stars all seem to fade and the moonlight gets dimmer. I'm blaming the fog for that one. Instantly, after driving through the fog, I get chills, goosebumps, and hairs on my arms and back stand up. I briefly slow the car, expecting something to jump out in front of us. My wife inquired about why I was stopping. I just told her something felt weird. I peered into the woods with my peripheral vision. I was too much of a wuss to look directly into it, but I saw nothing. Again, just like years before, I felt like I was being watched. The fog remained as we pulled up to the house. I told the wife to wait in the car as I hurried to the door of the house to unlock it. The fog had an odor to it, something I didn't get to experience last time. It smelled like morning breath. That was the best description that most people could imagine, as if someone was breathing on me. Once the door was open, we went inside with no event. I let the dogs out in the fenced part of the property, away from the woods toward the lake. There was no fog coming off the lake, definitely coming from the woods. They didn't seem to alert to anything, but were very reluctant to stay outside. Ben, who had experienced the spooky experience before, was not barking this time. He didn't leave within a few feet of me though. Not usual behavior for home when we were inside or at our apartment in Florida. Outside at the lake though, he's usually far more adventurous. We go to bed to no significant events aside from the fog lingering. The next morning, I wake up and peek outside. No fog, just beautiful sunshine and fresh air. I walk out with the dogs who act normal once again. I don't immediately notice anything overtly perturbed or unusual. Our lab, Penny though, seems to have found something under the porch. A portion of their porch has enough clearance to squat under. I peek under to examine what she has. She's allergic to everything, and the last thing I wanted to deal with was a sick dog while we were on vacation. There were about 10 dead rabbits under that porch. It took a bit to get my dog away from them and out from under the porch so she wouldn't try to eat them. All of them were cold, but not stiff, and with matching bite marks on their backs. Almost like a dog bite, but lacking the accompanying signs of shaking that dogs tend to do when they grab something. Very spooky. This past spring, my hubby and I went to Acadia National Park in Maine. There are tons of cabins to rent surrounding the historic town. Anyway, we rented a small cabin and had our dog with us. We had been there 2 days with no issue. I had found a private side road a few hundred feet from the cabin that led to some newer, nice houses. I even saw a woman putting her elementary-age children in her Subaru. I felt perfectly fine on that quarter-mile track. I also chose to walk my dog down that road because the cabin was along a highway and it backed up against thick woods. The first 2 days I walked my dog down that road, I didn't have any issue. The third day, however, I was walking in the morning and got a weird feeling. I felt like I needed to turn back, so I did. My dog at that moment started to whine in a way that I had never heard her whine before or since. She looked into the woods while yipping, so I decided to book it back to the cabin. There were 2 dirt footpaths that led to this road. I only took the one near the cabin and not the other one near the barn on the property we were staying at. I get back to the cabin and let hubby know what happened. He got this look on his face, and then he told me. The night before, he had walked our dog towards the barn nearby and taken the other footpath. On the side by the trees, he saw what looked like animal skulls, 2 empty liquor bottles, candles, and other items arranged in a deliberate way on a table in the woods. He got a terrible feeling and retreated. Now, my husband is in the military and has been to war, and he's seen a lot of stuff. He doesn't get scared easily. This, though, really creeped him out. It further freaked us out because I realized we got the bad feeling near the barn. My dog was on edge after that, and so was I. I was very happy that we were on our way shortly thereafter. It also turned out that that was the night of a full moon, so we believed that it was possibly set up for a ritual, or as an altar. Somebody told me to post my story/question here for more accurate answers, so here I go. 2 or 3 times a year, we vacation in a cabin in the wilderness. Me, my wife, and our 3 young children and 2 dogs. I am no stranger to the wild, and have made a lot of multiple day and week solo trips in national parks, and even in the Arctic Circle. Yesterday, I went for a 10-mile solo hike. At the farthest point, after 2 hours, I heard my children arguing, playing, crying, laughing, and calling me from the forest. I was totally alone, and my first instinct was to run through the thick brush and trees where the sound was coming from. But then I realized that it couldn't be my kids and I should just walk on and ignore it. I decided to walk back to the cabin. The whole family was there and never left. I know how my children sound, and I swear it was them. Later, I realized the combination of all the sounds, laughing, crying, playing, etc., made no sense. What was this experience? What did I hear? This happened about 20 years ago when I was a junior in high school in southern Louisiana. At this time, a few friends and I would go canoeing on the weekends. One of our friends lived right next to a local river, and we would just park a car at a landing several miles downstream from his property, and then drive back to his house and canoe back down to the landing. It would usually take us a few hours because we would just take our time, take breaks to swim or stop and eat on the riverbank beaches along the way. On this day in particular, there were 4 of us, all males 16 to 17 years old. After we got on the river this day, our friend, whose property was on the river, remarked about a weird place he and another friend had seen on the river on a prior trip. He described it as a cult compound that was set back from the river a few yards into the woods. He said that he would be able to remember the little ramshackle dock that was built on the river in front of it if he saw it. In our teenage minds, we thought it would be the perfect adventure for the day to try and find and explore this cult compound if we could. Only in the mind of a 16-year-old boy would it seem like a great idea to walk around uninvited at a creepy structure in the woods. So we set off and were in our usual high spirits. It was a beautiful day, and we were having a good time. After a while, our friend sees a dirt road that led away from the riverbank into the woods. He said he thinks this road would lead to a weird place. So we bank the canoes and start down this dirt road. Not too long on the road, though, and we began to get attacked by a swarm of horseflies. To this day, it was the most horseflies I have ever encountered. We decided to cancel our little trip down this road and ran as fast as we could back to the canoes. Surprisingly, the horseflies didn't follow us to the canoes, and we continued down the river on our merry way. Now I wonder what would have happened if we continued walking down that road. But also, I regretted not taking it as a hint to stop our search for the cult compound. A little after that, though, our friend sees the handmade dock that he mentioned earlier. So, we decide to dock there and continue our adventure. We climbed up the bank of the river and walked into the wood line. After a few steps, I could see it. In a clearing was a 2-story shack built from an assortment of lumber, tarps, and billboards. It was about the time that I noticed the moat dug around it that I realized, oh, a crazy person lives here. We should probably leave. But before the words could leave my mouth, we saw him walking towards us. He looked a lot like Charles Manson, with his unkempt brown hair and woolly beard. He was wearing khaki shorts and an Abita beer t-shirt, and had something shiny and metallic in his hands that I thought was a knife. He said to us, "Turn around." I thought this was a wonderful idea, so we turned around to walk back to the canoes. He then said, "Not that way," and then bam, fires a shot into some bushes next to him. I realized at that point that it was a pistol that he had, and not a knife. He then led us to his clearing and sat us down in the dirt. I looked above us and noticed that we were sitting under a log that had been suspended by ropes and pulleys. I don't know if he could have pulled some switch and dropped the log on us or what. So he starts to rant and rave at us about all the people that he has shot before who have tried to steal from him. He said that he's also had his dogs attack people before, and proceeded to tell dogs that we couldn't see or hear to shut up and stop barking. And I think to myself, well, I'm gonna die. It was weird because I wasn't panicked, and I remember thinking that I was kind of lucky because most people don't know when and where or how they'll die, but I did. I know, it's weird, and I have no idea why I was thinking that or how exactly it comforted me. Then I remember being a little sad that my parents may never find my body or ever find out what happened to me. He kept ranting, and I remember thinking that I would stay calm and compliant, but if he started shooting, tried to tie us up, or tried to make us go into his shack, I would try and fight him for the gun. I would have rather gone out fighting than be tied up and face some kind of other horror. He tells us that he needs our information so that he can call the police. I was really relieved at that notion and wanted to say yes, call the police right now. He goes into his truck, which was an old beat-up Toyota Tacoma type truck, and starts to look for a paper and pen. He couldn't find any paper, so he handed us a small piece of lumber and told us to write our names and addresses on it. 3 of us wrote fake names and addresses because we didn't want this guy to know where we lived, but a 4th guy actually wrote down his real name and address. His rants continued, and he tells us that he fought in Vietnam, and often the Vietnamese would sneak up and attack in groups of 3 and 4, just like we were doing. I decided to try and make small talk with him, and I said, "So you were in the military?" So he starts to tell us that his shack was actually built by the Navy and transported down the river to this location. He said he was in the Navy and trained Marines martial arts. He regaled us with other stories and kind of switched from angry, menacing rants to a happy, friendly ranting. He says that he could tell that we weren't there to rob him because we don't have any buckets. He tells us that his parents always welcomed guests here, and he was happy to do the same. He proceeded to tell us to stand up and walk us back to our canoes. He tells us we are always welcome to come back, and if we need a name to call this place, we should call it Skull Island, because his parents and the bones of several dogs were buried here. Our same friend who wrote his real name and address down says, "Oh, I'm never coming back here." We elbowed him and whispered for him to shut up, and we waved goodbye to our host. We then got back in the canoes and paddled in silence the whole way back. I was worried that at any point he was following us in the woods with a rifle, ready to switch back to menacing mode and decide to take us out. But thankfully, we made it back to the landing and were able to drive off in peace, after the four of us had a huge group hug. So the lesson is, if you don't already know it, never trespass on people's land in the woods, especially if you already know the place is supposed to be creepy. Looking back as I got older, I feel bad for the man. He most likely had some mental health issues and was living in a place where he just wanted to be left alone. He shouldn't have to deal with a bunch of teenage boys near his place, and may have had people try and steal from him before. I am doubtful if he ever shot anyone before, but I am definitely thankful that it didn't end worse for us. In many rural areas of the American West, cutting firewood in national forests is a necessary chore if you want a warm house through the winter. Our home in mountainous central Idaho was no exception. It was normal for my dad to pick me and my brothers up after school and head into the mountains for an afternoon of firewood gathering. My dad would fell the dead trees, then saw them into chunks. My brothers and I had the task of rolling the wood to the truck and loading it. He would continue this assembly line process until we had a truckload of wood, usually before nightfall. Hot, sweaty, and exhausted, we would pile into the truck cab and make our way down the mountain. At home the next day, we would unload and split the wood and stack it into neat little rows. This process was repeated until we had a winter's worth of fuel for our house, our grandma's cabin, and any extra for elderly neighbors. This particular afternoon, we decided to try a different logging road on the other side of the valley. This was well outside our familiar logging area. No real reason for the change, but my dad said he wanted a change of the scenery. This log road hadn't been maintained in some time. Large rocks and fallen branches littered the path. My brothers and I had to walk out in front, pushing rocks and wood out of the way as my dad lurched the truck up the switchbacks. Yard by yard, we slowly made our way up the mountain. That hike was physically brutal. As we ascended the mountain and got further into the trees, this odd feeling started to set in. I wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion from the hike or something more. There was electricity in the air, like the whole mountain was buzzing at a wavelength just below my senses. In some odd way, it felt like the mountain knew we were there, and it wasn't welcome to that fact. I wanted to say something to my brothers, but before I opened my mouth, my younger brother said, "Does anyone else feel like we're not welcome here?" My older brother and I stopped in our tracks and looked back at him. Both of us nodded in agreement. This moment was broken by my dad honking and motioning us to continue clearing the path. Reluctantly, we pushed forward to a small clearing in the woods, where we finally stopped the truck. My dad, oblivious to our apprehension, or simply choosing to ignore it, grabbed his saw and went to work. As the wood was felled and loaded, I couldn't shake this ominous feeling enveloping me like a dark shroud. I noticed my brothers were taking occasional glances over their shoulders as we worked. Everyone but my dad, it seemed, was on edge. The sun nestled down into the trees and twilight began to set in. As the light drained from the sky, my anxiety only intensified. It wasn't until my dad unexpectedly told us to load up that a wave of relief flooded over me. I could see the tension in my brothers melt away as well. The truck wasn't fully loaded. An oddity. Getting a half load was a waste according to my dad. We would sometimes work into the dark just to make sure the truck was full. But tonight, he seemed eager to head home. With everything loaded, we started down the road. Although dead tired, everyone seemed to be in a much lighter mood. We were chatting and cracking jokes while trying to blow off steam from the afternoon. We were almost out of the tree line and into the valley desert. Going down the switchbacks, you want to be careful, especially with a load, even if it was half that. A brown blur jumped up from the downslope side of the switchback. Crap was the only word that came out of my dad's mouth as he slammed on the brakes. Loaded with wood and traveling downhill, there was no way to avoid smashing into the blur. The truck finally ground to a standstill. The four of us peered through the windshield, nobody saying a word. Illuminated in the yellow glow of our headlights was a crumpled body of a deer. Grumbling and cursing the deer's existence, my dad exited the truck to investigate. Doing as they were told, my brothers stayed put in the truck. I didn't listen, following close behind my dad. The truck was fine. We hadn't been traveling fast when we smacked the deer. Just some hair and blood in the grill guard. Hitting a deer really wasn't that unusual. The mountains were full of them. What was unusual was that the deer dropped so quickly. At faster speeds, deer could still be upright and sprinting away to die in the woods after a collision. That last burst of an adrenaline dump. This one fell over like a rag doll. Before even approaching the carcass, a deep, foul smell hit us. Deer smell bad when they're alive, but this was on a whole other level. It was the smell of decay and rot. My stomach began to turn as we got closer. My nostrils were burning. Coming up on the deer, it was clearly dead. Like, really, really dead. The stench was so overwhelming that my eyes were watering. The body was a true horror scene. The deer's eyes were gone, replaced with a sunken hollow hole, as if to overcompensate for their absence. The tongue was swollen and black as coal. It could not be contained and hung out the side of its mouth. The underbelly was split open. Entrails and offal spilled into the dirt. In the dim headlights, it looked as though the deer's fur and viscera were moving, wiggling almost. Holding my breath, I bent down for a closer look, and my heart stopped. The deer, inside and out, was covered in maggots. It was dead all right, but our truck didn't kill it. Clearly it had been dead for days, if not weeks. I backed away retching. That electric anxiety came screeching back. My dad was always the quiet, stoic type, but right now, even in the dim headlights of the truck, I could see the abject horror in his face. His gaze wasn't on the deer, but focused down the mountain. Poorly masking the fear in his voice, he told me firmly to walk back to the truck and get inside. I obeyed without objection. As I grabbed the door handle, a loud shriek came out of the trees. Branches were shattering and breaking. Something was heading up the slope towards us. I slammed my door closed just as my dad reached the truck. Before his door was shut, he pressed on the accelerator. The truck launched forward, sending us over the deer carcass and racing downhill. With mine and my brothers yelling, it was hard to tell if the shrieking was following us. Our truck popped out of the tree line and into the desert sagebrush. Once out of the woods, everything quieted down. We were left with only the rumble of the engine and wind through the half-open windows. Pulling into our property, the truck came to a stop. We sat in silence. No one moved to leave the truck. Everyone started talking at once. We all had questions. What was the screaming? How does a dead deer jump uphill in front of a truck? There was no way the truck killed it. Dad just shook his head and motioned for us to quiet down. That deer was dead when we hit it. It didn't jump out in front of us. It was thrown at us. We stared at him. He explained that all day up on the mountain he had felt uneasy. Not wanting to worry us boys, he kept it to himself. He described it like walking into a stranger's living room while they were upstairs asleep. That feeling never left him, and as twilight came, he happened to catch a shadow in the corner of his eye, not far into the woods, and saw figures moving from tree to tree. He couldn't focus on them long enough for a good look before they dodged behind trees. His stomach dropped. Working hard to keep his composure, he hurried us back to the truck to leave. It was after hitting the deer and discovering it was long dead that my dad pieced together what was happening. Something threw that deer to get us to stop. Before the shrieking began, he could hear something moving in the darkness beyond the road. It was a trap. Running back to the truck could have started an ambush or triggered a prey dive, so we walked back to the truck. The second we were inside, he drove that truck downhill with no intention of stopping for anyone or anything. That feeling of electricity didn't disappear until we hit the county highway. My brothers and I never saw anything as we drove away, but those screams from the forest will never leave my mind. We didn't gather firewood the rest of the season. For the first time in his life, my dad just bought what we needed. And although we started to gather wood again the next season, we've never been back up that particular mountain. The Forest Service has permanently closed and reclaimed that road. The only way back up into those woods is a long hike, one that I'm not interested in ever taking again. Whatever was on that mountain, whatever threw that deer carcass, whatever chased us out of the woods, it did not want us there. It wanted us gone. Or worse, it wanted us dead. I was with my friends. We were all in the car sitting, waiting for another person to text us and tell us to head to their house. It was like 10 p.m., so dark but not too late, and all the windows were down, and we hear this short, monotone whistle noise, like somebody calling a dog. It wasn't too high-pitched, and not lasting more than a couple seconds. Then 20 seconds later it happened again, almost the same but different enough that it couldn't have been a machine. It kept happening every 20 to 30 seconds. Everybody was terrified, but my superstitious friends said, "Don't acknowledge it," and we carried on our conversation. And it seemed to go away, but not for a few minutes. It was eerie. I don't think it was a human calling a dog or something like that because there didn't seem to be any urgency. But it sort of sounded like it was communicating to something, and it sounded maybe human, not a bug or a coyote. I live in the Pacific Northwest, by the way. Last note, all of us heard it and it freaked all of us out. Like maybe it was just a really creepy bird, but it felt like it was talking to or trying to find something, and it was just one of those feelings that make your hair stand up. We weren't even in the boonies, just in a pretty rural area just outside town, with lots of forest and not a lot of houses. As a child/young teen, I lived in a very strange situation in the woods. I'm not sure if this encounter may have been some kind of entity, or perhaps something different. I hope someone can give me more information about what happened to me and my friend. I'm a female, and I was around 12 years old at the time, and one of my best friends, Alex, must have been 10. Alex's father had purchased a large amount of forested land around 100 kilometers away from the city that we lived in, Montreal, Canada. It was all forest when Alex's family acquired it. They cleared a little patch to build a house, and the rest was pure, unadulterated forest. Their land was cut in two by a dirt road that, if you followed it for several kilometers, led to a few houses. And their land was very different, depending on which side of the dirt road you looked. On the right side, where their house was, the forest was light and luminous, or at least it felt that way. It wasn't too dense with little rolling hills, a lovely place to play. On the left side of the road, though, it was another story. First, there was a deep ditch, perhaps 2 meters deep, which then became a quite high and steep hill. Weirdly enough, all along the long road, the ditch was full of car parts. A set of car wheels here, a door there, a steering wheel way over there, all old and overgrown with moss. And over the steep hill, the forest gave off a really bad vibe. It had lots of very tall, dark coniferous trees with almost black trunks, and the place seemed somehow devoid of light or life. Climbing the hill, which we seldom were willing to do because of the creeps it gave us, there was some sort of swamp there. When we were there was this strange pressure. We sensed a kind of animal instinct that told us to leave this place. The strange atmosphere was spontaneously obvious to both me and Alex, and we playfully called that side of the road Demon's Forest. One weekend day, probably in 2001 or 2002, my family and I came to visit Alex's family. Bored by the adults, my friend and I decided to go play in the forest. Alex's father told us to watch out. There was an animal that had been rummaging in their trash bin and causing other nuisances. He said it was a dog that looked somewhat like a Rottweiler, that surely belonged to someone living up the dirt road. He warned us that we shouldn't interact with the dog if we saw it, as it didn't look healthy, as far as he could tell, or something was weird about it. He said it somehow looked diseased or contagious, or had patches of fur missing. I can't remember exactly. And so we set out on our walk. It was autumn, and the leaves were pretty and golden, many having already fallen to the ground. It was a calm, slightly overcast, windless day. The air was very still and calm. Alex and I decided to walk along the dirt road, with the pleasant section of the forest to our right, and the demon's forest to our left. We chatted while following the road, as it was rising up a slope. As usual, we were slightly creeped out going up the road because of the weird vibes of the forest to the left side, but we were challenging ourselves to be brave and try to not really think about how unsettling it felt. A good distance away from their home, when it was already well out of sight, I noticed the first strange thing of the day. Out of the steep hill on the left side of the road, there was a very large and dark pine tree hanging over the road. Somebody had attached a pink ribbon to one of the branches, which was already strange, since this was the territory of Alex's family, and they had no daughters or other little girls likely to hang around, or other people who may be owners of pink ribbons who were likely to hang out in this deserted road. The strange thing was, the ribbon was flailing strongly in the wind. Its loose ends were flapping almost horizontally. The thing is, it was a completely windless day. There was no wind to speak of. The ribbon was within my reach, so I even touched it as it was flailing. I even licked my finger and held it in the air to check if I could feel any wind or air current at all, as my dad had taught me to do. The air was perfectly still, yet the ribbon flailed. I mentioned it to my friend. He seemed distracted and was younger than me, and sometimes didn't catch on to what I said, so I didn't press the matter. We continued our climb. We reached a place where the hill on the left side of the road had a gentler slope, and began further away from the road. In fact, it looked as if the hill was kind of carved out in a way that would have made it easy for us to climb to get into Demon's Forest. It almost seemed as if the hill was carved in a sloping half circle, like in a theater, and the road we stood on would have been the stage. It gave us a very clear, treeless view of the hillside, full of golden and red fallen leaves. The trees began at the top of the hill, maybe 9 meters higher. We stopped to admire the view. Canadian autumns are a sight to behold. Alex suddenly got really excited. He thought he heard something in the Demon Woods, up the hill, and he really wanted me to pay attention. He explained that there are wild cats in that forest. They had spotted them with his dad. One of them had reportedly had kittens. Kittens being one of the most exciting things in the world for kids our age, getting us all riled up. But somehow my hackles were up, and I couldn't really relax, even thinking about adorable wild kittens. He actually thought he had heard the cat meow in the forest up the hill close by. I heard nothing of the sort and thought that he was just making it up. He vehemently suggested that we try meowing at it to see if it would respond. Maybe it would even bring its kittens along and we could see them and play with them, he said. I hadn't heard any sounds at all, and didn't really like his idea of screaming meows into the creepy forest. What kind of wild cat would respond to human children anyway? Wouldn't it be obvious that we're not cats by the sounds of us? That seemed like a dumb idea to me. Before I could try to talk him out of it, he loudly meowed into the forest. To my utter shock, the forest meowed back. Alex was delighted. He meowed again. Something in the forest answered again. I was actually shocked. This didn't make sense to me, and it creeped me out, but I suspended my disbelief to see what would happen. He kept meowing over and over. For every one of his meows, there was one coming back in response from the woods. Something felt off to me. Feral or wild animals didn't behave that way. Even at 12 years old, I realized that. And it wasn't an echo. The cat did not bounce back any sound that we threw at it except meows, which it reciprocated immediately. And anyway, there were no hard rocky surfaces around off of which sound could bounce. Everything was covered in a soft layer of sound-dulling leaves. Alex got even more excited. Listen, the cat is coming towards us. She's coming to see us with her kittens. To my surprise, he was right. There was a rustle of dead leaves coming from above us, from above the slope in the creepy forest. It seemed like the rustling was getting closer to us, but it was way off, because cats are small and light and careful with their steps. They don't make a ruckus when they walk through the woods. But here, the rustling leaves sound was extremely obvious, along with the meowing. And in fact, it sounded more like footsteps, like someone with two legs walking in the leaves, and it was getting closer to us. My alarm signals were starting to go off with the wrongness of it all, while my younger friend was oblivious. He was calling it more vehemently, noticing that it was coming towards us. Then I realized what seemed so wrong. The sound was coming towards us, but there was nothing to be seen. Right in front of us, we had the gently sloping hill, treeless and clearly visible. Anything coming from the forest should have been plainly exposed to view. There was nothing. No source for the rustling sound. Nothing moving. Oh, her kittens are joining her. Listen, there are more sounds. They're coming to play with us. He was right. The walking sound seemed to have multiplied, and now it came from various directions at once, ever getting closer, with nothing being visible. Something was way off. I wanted to leave, but Alex was getting mad at me. The kittens were almost here and he wanted to see them. He insisted. At this point, I was extremely tense, and fight or flight was activating from the wrongness of it all. We were alone, and quite exposed on this theater stage to whatever was getting closer to us, which was more and more obviously with every moment decidedly not kittens. I was on the verge of forcing him to go run home, and then, suddenly, I heard a very loud panting sound, right at my feet. During the first millisecond, I got only mildly surprised. We had a huge husky at home. I was used to it panting next to my feet. But then, a sense of profound dread dawned on me as I realized that obviously my dog was not here, and it must be another dog, a very big one by the sound of it, right at my feet. I panickingly looked down, ready to jump away from the dog that somehow got extremely close to me, almost on me without my noticing. Only there is absolutely nothing at my feet, but I still hear the loud, breathy panting sound coming from there. I whirl around, all 360 degrees screaming. Where is it coming from? There is nothing at my feet or anywhere around me. There is nothing there, yet the sound is clearly there. As I whirl about in a frenzy, I look up the dirt road we were following. Around 100 meters away at the top of the slope, I see a lone dog standing. It looks somewhat similar to a Rottweiler, but in very, very bad shape. Extremely unkempt, with patches of fur missing. Shaggy and dirty as heck, with some skin exposed where the fur is missing. It looks down at us too. Obviously, there is no way that I could hear it panting at that distance, and the source of the sound is at my feet. At that point, the flight instinct wins inside of me. I have never ran as desperately and as fast in my whole life. Thank goodness it was all downhill. Alex kept pace right behind me, terrified. We made it home in one piece. We didn't walk in these woods anymore. I came back to Alex's place several times in my life. I never wanted to walk in the woods again. We had amazing parties at his house as teens. I was often there rather drunk and having a great time, but I always had this very stressful sensation when I went out of his house, especially at night. When I slept over there, I had these extremely strange experiences where when I woke up, I sensed as if something was there and was observing me. In my mid-awake state, I even saw something, floating near the ceiling. It had the sensation that it was not an immediate threat though. It was just observing. I'm not sure that whatever this is was related to what happened on the dirt road. We never discussed what happened that day. As I research it now, I see that this land is historically Algonquin land, though one source seemed to say Mohawk. If anybody can help clarify what happened, I would be eternally thankful. I've been thinking about this for years, and I am still baffled. When I was a child, maybe 11, I lived near the river in Pulaski County on very private land. One road, no walkthroughs, fenced off. Behind our property was river, and we could walk to it, but anyone trying to access the property would have to boat or swim in, stumble through the woods, stumble through a large garden that we had, and a large yard with huge floodlights that were motion sensing. In front of the house was more dense woods and our private road, one way in, one way out, more porch lights, and at the end of that road was a steel gate. So I was maybe 9 or 10, and I wanted to catch fireflies. My mom said okay, gave me a mason jar, and I went to leave, and I told my mom that I was turning off the front porch light to see them better. She said it was okay, but not to go to the tree line. So I was out there for 6 or 7 fireflies worth when I started to see something odd. There was a strange light hanging in between some trees. It didn't move, didn't turn, didn't shake, rotate, or anything. I stared at it for a while, fascinated and scared, but trying to figure out what it was. It appeared to be a ball and not a beam, and was definitely well defined. I was starting to get past my fascination, and I was getting scared. Then another appeared further in the trees, maybe 5 feet further back. They were literally just hanging there in the air, single balls of light clearly defined. I decided that enough was enough and ran to the house. My parents said that I was hysterical enough to warrant a rifle search of the property, and my mom called the police who came out. No one found anything. No evidence of a fire, lanterns hung in trees as a joke. Nothing. I already knew that it was neither, but I hoped that someone would figure it out. I was in deep crap with my dad, who told me that I was making up nonsense, and I got the belt and was put on a diet of stacking wood for the winter that my dad was splitting, housework, etc. Does anyone have any idea what those lights might have been? Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope that you enjoyed them. Also, I hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Again, I do apologize if my voice is a little bit raspy. I am still recovering from being sick. But anyways, I hope you have an excellent rest of your night. And if you would like to try some treats, make sure that you check them out in the link in the description down below. Good night, everybody, and have an excellent sleep. And I'll read to you in the next video.